When they sold my farm while I was in the hospital, I still remember the smell of rain on the morning everything changed. It wasn't heavy rain, not the kind that sweeps across fields and fills the ditches. It was soft rain, almost shy, just enough to darken the dirt road and leave tiny beads of water on the leaves outside my window. Usually, that smell makes me feel grounded, like the world is washing itself clean. But that morning, it felt like the air was warning me, like heaven itself was whispering, "Something is coming, and you won't be ready for it." I was lying in a hospital bed when the rain began. The sheets were stiff, too white, too tight around my legs, and the ceiling above me was covered in tiny squares, each one blurring into the next as my tired eyes tried to focus. The machines beside me hummed and beeped softly, a rhythm that didn't match the rhythm of my heart. My chest still hurt, not as sharp as the night before, but enough to remind me that something inside me was fragile, something that years of working alone and worrying too much had finally cracked. The doctors called it stress built up over too many days, too many nights, too many worries piled quietly on my shoulders. "You've been carrying too much for too long," one of them said gently, as if the softness of his voice would make the truth easier to swallow. Maybe it should have. Maybe I should have felt relieved, or grateful, or hopeful. But instead, lying there with the rain tapping against the window, I felt only a hollow ache inside my chest, a heaviness that no doctor could measure with a stethoscope. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that while I was struggling to breathe, struggling to calm my racing heart, struggling to convince myself that everything at home would be fine until I returned, my own son and daughter-in-law were making plans that would break me far deeper than any illness ever had. They were selling my farm, not discussing it, not considering it, not asking me, selling it, my land, not my home, the soil my hands had touched every single day for 40 long years, the place where my husband and I had poured our sweat, our time, our dreams, and our love. They were doing it quietly, secretly, like thieves in the night, except the night was broad daylight, and the betrayal was hidden not behind shadows but behind silence. The part that still aches the most, even now, even after everything, is not the betrayal itself, not the paper they signed, not the strangers they spoke to, not the agents they contacted. The wound that hurts the deepest is the silence. Nobody told me. Not a call, not a message, not even a whisper over the phone saying, "Mom, we need to talk." And when the truth finally came to me, when the lie opened itself like a crack in the earth, I didn't react the way people expect a mother to react when her child betrays her. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I didn't even ask them why they did it. Instead, I smiled, a small, tired, fragile smile. The kind of smile a person gives when the world hits them so hard their heart simply doesn't know how to respond anymore. That smile wasn't strength. It was surrender. Not surrender to them, but surrender to a truth I had been avoiding for far too long. Because deep inside, I already knew something they had forgotten. Something that had protected me all these years without me even realizing it. The land was not theirs to sell. It had never been theirs. They had rushed ahead with greed, with impatience, with a selfishness that had grown quietly inside them like a weed choking a healthy field. They believed I was too old to understand paperwork, too tired to fight, too sick to protest, too gentle to resist. They thought they could make decisions about my life while I was lying in that hospital bed trying to steady my breath. But what they didn't know, what they never bothered to check, was that the farm, the deed, the rights, the land, every blade of grass and every corner of soil was still completely mine. But my story doesn't begin in that hospital room. Not at all. That room, that betrayal, that broken moment was just the climax, the sharp sting, after years of small cuts. My real story begins much earlier, in a far softer place. It begins with love, with devotion, with sacrifice, with a mother who believed, perhaps too naively, that giving everything to her child would guarantee she would never be left behind or forgotten. I didn't know then that life doesn't pay you back for love the way you imagine it will. I thought love worked like planting seasons. Sow kindness, reap kindness. Sow sacrifice, reap loyalty. But human hearts do not follow farm rules. They break easily, drift quickly, change silently. Still, none of that stopped me from trying. When I first stepped onto that land with my husband, Daniel, we were young, so young we didn't even understand how young. The farm wasn't just property. It was a dream we built from nothing. We woke before sunrise every day, walked barefoot through the dew that sparkled like diamonds on the grass, breathed air so clean it tasted sweet. We raised animals with our own hands, planted fields together, fixed broken things with laughter, not frustration. Life was not easy, but it was beautiful. And when our son was born, the farm became the heart of our family. He took his first steps on that soil, spoke his first words in that old kitchen, played with puppies in the barn, chased fireflies in the summer evenings until Daniel scooped him up and carried him to bed. We taught him everything we knew: how to plant, how to harvest, how to respect the land, and for a long time, he loved it. He loved us. He loved the life we built. But life has a way of changing people slowly, sometimes quickly, other times, and sometimes without warning at all. When Daniel died, the world dimmed. The farm felt too big, too quiet, too heavy for me alone. But I stayed because leaving felt like abandoning him. Every fence post, every ridge in the field, every squeak of the oldest barn door held a memory of the man I loved more than anything. And you don't walk away from memories like that, not if you still need them. Mark. My son visited less after college. The city had swallowed him up, given him a new life, a new identity, a new way of measuring success. He met Jessica, woman with sharp eyes, manicured nails, expensive bags, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She didn't understand farm life and didn't care to. She looked at my home like it was an outdated relic she had to tolerate for the sake of her husband. But I tried. God knows I tried. I cooked for them, cleaned for them, listened to them. I tried to make her feel welcome, even though everything about her said she didn't want to be welcomed. Over time, comments turned into distance. Distance turned into silence. Silence turned into coldness. Little by little, I could feel myself slipping out of my own child's life, like a photo fading from someone's wallet. But even then, I never imagined they would make decisions about my life without me. I never imagined they would walk onto my land with cameras, with agents, with strangers, while I lay in a hospital fighting to breathe. That morning in the hospital, the morning the rain smelled strange. I felt a heaviness in my chest that went beyond illness. Something inside me whispered that things at home were shifting, that the life I had built so carefully was tilting beneath me. But I didn't know how much. I didn't know that while I lay there trying to calm my heartbeat, my family, my own son, was signing papers behind my back. I didn't know they were opening accounts, taking pictures of my porch, showing my barn to strangers, sending drone shots of my fields to potential buyers. I didn't know they were discussing prices, negotiating offers, arranging visits, all without telling me. And when I finally returned home, using weak arms to push open the car door, stepping slowly onto the gravel path, still dizzy from the medication, still fragile from the stress, what greeted me was not love, not warmth, not welcome, but strangers on my porch, strangers measuring the windows, strangers talking about remodeling the barn, strangers discussing how the old place could be modernized. And there, in the middle of all those strangers, stood my son, looking at me as if I were the one interrupting. That moment, God, that moment felt like the world stopped spinning. The silence between us was thick enough to suffocate me. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. Jessica's arms were crossed in irritation, and the strangers looked awkward, unsure who I even was. In that silence, in that heartbreak, something shifted inside me. It was the beginning of the end of my blind trust, but it was also the beginning of something else, something powerful. Because right then, as I looked at my son's guilty face and my daughter-in-law's cold eyes, I realized they had forgotten something incredibly important. The land was still mine, legally, completely, irrevocably, without my signature. Nothing they had done mattered. Thought they could erase me, push me out, rewrite my life without consequences. But they had made a terrible mistake, and I was about to show them just how powerful the truth can be when someone tries to erase it. I grew up believing land had a heartbeat. Not a loud one, not something you could hear with your ears, but something you felt in the soles of your feet when you stepped out early in the morning before the sun rose. There was a hum in the ground, a quiet strength in the way the earth held itself together, even after storms tried their best to tear it apart. When you work on a farm long enough, you learn its moods: when it's thirsty, when it's tired, when it's giving you everything it has, even when you've got nothing left to give back. I used to tell Daniel that the soil remembered us, remembered our laughter, our sorrow, our footsteps. And for nearly 40 years, that land wasn't just my home. It was the closest thing I had to a living history book of my life. Donald, my husband, was a gentleman, not gentle in the soft, delicate way, but gentle like steady rain that feeds the crops without flooding them. He had hands rough enough to sand wood, but a voice calm enough to quiet storms inside my chest. When he stood out in the field, the wind always seemed to wrap around him as if it knew him personally. He used to say, "This farm will outlive us, sweetheart. Treat it well." And I did. I treated it with a love that felt like devotion, the kind of devotion that makes you step outside at dawn, even when your bones ache, even when your body begs you to rest. I treated it with patience, the slow kind that teaches you that everything worth having takes time. And I treated it with pride, because every fence post, every row of corn, every barn board had a little piece of me in it. When our son, Mark, was born, the world felt so much bigger and so much smaller. At the same time, bigger, because suddenly the future stretched wide with possibility, smaller, because everything that mattered fit right there in my arms. I remember holding him near the kitchen window, the morning light spilling over his tiny face like a blessing. The fields were glowing gold, and I whispered to him, "One day, this will be yours." Maybe it was foolish to plant dreams in a child before they could even speak. But something inside me believed he would grow up with the same attachment to the land that held our family together for years. I thought I was right. Mark fed the chickens before school like it was a sacred ritual. He'd run barefoot down the gravel road with the kind of carefree joy you only see in children who trust the world completely. He built little forts out in the oak grove, climbing branches that I prayed were sturdy enough. He'd fall asleep on Daniel's lap in the tractor, the rumbling engine soothing him more than any lullaby. Those were the days when life felt strong, full, steady, the kind of days you don't take pictures of because you never think they'll end. But life changes quietly at first, slipping through the cracks like water. When Mark left for college, I told myself I was prepared. I told myself every child grows up and leaves home, that it was a sign we'd done something right. But deep down, I felt a small tear inside me, the kind that doesn't bleed but aches for years. He had big dreams, dreams that didn't involve muddy boots or wheat harvests or fixing leaking barn roofs. He wanted tall buildings and bright lights, a life where weather forecasts didn't decide whether you could sleep at night. He wanted more than the slow rhythm of farm life, and I loved him enough to let him chase that dot still. Letting him go was the hardest easy thing I ever did. Years rolled by like seasons, and with them came changes I didn't see coming. Mark married a woman named Jessica, a woman who walked into our world like she stepped into a movie set she didn't care for. She was sharp, stylish, modern, the kind of woman who carried confidence like perfume. I'll never forget the first time she visited the farm. She got out of the car in high heels so thin and shiny they had no business touching dirt. They sank almost immediately, and she looked around with eyes that were not curious, not appreciative, not even polite, but disappointed, as if she expected something grand and got something small. She never said it out loud, but I felt it in the air whenever she walked by. She didn't respect the simple life, she didn't respect the land, and eventually, she didn't respect me. Still, I tried. Lord knows I tried. I cooked big dinner spot, roasts, mashed potatoes, the dishes Daniel used to say could heal a man's soul. I told stories at the table, stories about Mark's childhood, thinking it might bridge the distance between us. But every visit felt shorter, every smile felt thinner. Every conversation felt like wading through cold water. Mark's calls became less frequent. His visits came with excuses. He stopped noticing the little things, the wilted crops, the sagging fence, the way the house felt too quiet without Daniel, who'd passed years earlier and left a silence I never fully recovered from. Meanwhile, the farm demanded more from me. My body wasn't young anymore, but the land didn't care. I carried hay bales with shoulders that had lost their strength. I fixed fences with hands that trembled. I woke up earlier because everything took longer. And I didn't complain, because complaining felt like admitting I was losing a race I'd been running my whole life. I didn't ask for help, because I didn't want to be a burden. But life, no matter how strong you think you are, catches up eventually. One night, after a long day of chores, I felt a pain in my chest that didn't feel like the usual tiredness. It squeezed tight, like a fist closing around my heart. I tried to breathe through it, tried to tell myself it was nothing, but the pain didn't listen. By the time I reached the hospital, everything felt blurry and distant. The lights were too bright. The machines beeped like alarms meant for someone else's life. The doctor's words came in peace. Sistress overworked. Exhaustion, respite. They struck me like cold water all the same. I called my son, not because I wanted pity, not because I needed saving, but because I thought a child should know when their mother is laid up in a hospital bed. He answered after the third ring. He didn't sound scared. He didn't sound worried. He sounded bothered, busy, interrupted. "Mom, we'll come by tomorrow," he said. Tried to relax, but tomorrow never came. Instead, while I lay there staring at the ceiling tiles, fighting the ache in my chest and the ache in my heart, they were making decisions about my life, about my land, my home, my legacy, without me. Decisions that would break something inside me in a way I didn't know could still break. When I came home from the hospital, the air felt different, not colder, not warmer, just unfamiliar, like I had walked into a version of my own life that looked the same but didn't feel the same. It was like stepping into a house that remembered my footsteps, my voice, my routines, but the people inside it no longer carried the same memory. The moment I opened the front door, something inside me tightened, a quiet warning I couldn't explain. The floorboards creaked the same way they always had. The smell of old wood and lavender cleaner drifted through the hallway like a memory trying to hold on. But beneath it all was a strange heaviness, an unwelcome silence that clung to the walls, like dust. The first sign that something was wrong sat in the kitchen that had been my sanctuary for decades. A pile of mail waited on the table, not neatly stacked but shuffled through, scattered, disturbed. There were envelopes with bold red stamps, papers clipped together, official forms with printed boxers and signatures. It looked like someone had been digging through my business, sifting through my personal life, making decisions I hadn't been part of. I hadn't been gone more than a week, but it felt like the house had lived a whole different life without me. Then came the second look on my son's face. When Mark stepped into the kitchen, he didn't greet me with warmth or relief. He didn't hug me, didn't ask how I was feeling, didn't even bother pretending he was happy to see me alive and home. Instead, he kept his eyes low, focused, on a spot on the floor, anywhere except my face. His shoulders were stiff, his hands shoved deep into his pockets like he wished he could disappear into them. And behind him came Jessica, her posture sharp as ever, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as if she was bracing for a storm even though the storm was inside me, not outside. "Mom?" she began, her voice too calm, too measured, too rehearsed. It was the kind of tone doctors used when delivering news they didn't want to explain twice. "We made some decisions while you were recovering." Something inside me froze. I didn't know what she was going to say, but I could feel the air shift, brittle and cold. I tried to smile. I tried to breathe. I tried so hard to believe that whatever she was about to tell me came from love, from care, from concern, from family. But the truth sat heavy in her eyes long before her mouth formed the words. "We listed the farm," she said. "It's for sale." For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard her right. The world around me slowed to a heavy crawl, each second stretching painfully, like time itself was struggling to move. The refrigerator hummed in the background. A loose shutter tapped against the side of the house. My heartbeat pulsed loudly in my ears. I felt the floor tilt under my feet, as if the earthy land that had held me steady my entire life was suddenly slipping away. "You listed it," I whispered, though the words felt foreign in my mouth, like they belonged to someone else who had too, Jessica said quickly, stepping forward like she was presenting a business pitch, not dismantling the foundation of my life. "The place is too much for you. You can't keep up with it anymore. And honestly, Mom, the money will help you." The money, as if money could replace memories, as if money could rebuild the walls where my husband's laughter once lived. As if money could restore the soil that held the footprints of my son's childhood. I turned to Mark then, silent, pleading with my eyes for him to say something, anything that made me feel like I still mattered, like I wasn't just an obstacle in their lives. I waited for him to defend me, to correct her, to soften the blow, but he didn't meet my gaze. He didn't stand up for me. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he shrugged light. They were talking about rearranging furniture, not uprooting the history of our family. It's what's best, he muttered, eyes finally lifting just long enough to show me that he wasn't uncertain. He was done with the farm, done with the responsibility, done with listening to anything I had to say. Those words, it's what's best, cut deeper than I expected, because they weren't said with love or pity. They were said with impatience, with annoyance, with a finality that told me they'd already made up their minds long before I walked through the door. Suddenly, all the strange things I noticed made sense. The unfamiliar cars near the barn, the strangers walking around my yard with clipboards and cameras, the measuring tape stretched across my porch as if it were a product on a shelf. They weren't just looking, they were evaluating, they were calculating, they were deciding the worth of something priceless to me. They had started showing the property, and they did it without me, without my consent, without even asking. For the next several days, they pushed me relentlessly, sliding papers across the table, urging me to sign things I hadn't read, scheduling meetings with agents, bankers, attorneys. Every time I said no, it felt like they heard a different word. They acted like I was being dramatic, hysterical, difficult. Mom, stop being emotional, Jessica would say, as if emotion was something shameful. Mom, be reasonable, Mark echoed, as if reason lived anywhere near betrayal. Mom, the buyers won't wait forever, they insisted, as if my lifetime of memories needed to hurry. Each sentence felt like sandpaper scraping against my heart, wearing it thinner and thinner until I barely recognized the sound of my own voice when I tried to argue back. Then came the morning that broke me. I woke to the sound of hammering outside, sharp, loud, final. When I stepped onto the porch, the wind felt colder than it had in years. I looked out and saw a large for sale pending sign staked proudly into my front yard. The metal post driven into the earth like a stake through everything I ever loved. Didn't cry. Not yet. Crying felt too small, too temporary for the pain blooming inside me. Instead, I turned around, walked back inside, and sat at the old wooden kitchen table. The chair across from me was empty, but in my heart, Daniel was sitting there like he always had, hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, eyes soft and patient. I looked at his empty place, at the little scratch he made years ago when he dropped a tool, at the faded ring where his mug always sat, and I whispered, "They don't understand. They don't know what this land means." My voice cracked, my hands trembled. Everything inside me felt so small, so alone, so invisible. But I was not powerless, not completely, not yet, because in their rush to get rid of the farm, in their hurry to erase my life and sell off my memories, they had forgotten something important. Something they didn't know, something I hadn't told them, something that would change everything. And in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of the life I had built, I felt a spark inside me, a spark of strength, of defiance, of truth. They thought they could take everything from me, but they had overlooked the one thing that still belonged to me, and only me. On the fourth day after I returned from the hospital, I woke up feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks: clarity. It wasn't strength, and it wasn't hope. It was more like a quiet awareness, the kind you get when you've cried all your tears and there's nothing left but the truth. The morning sunlight spilled across the floor in long, soft stripes, lighting up the kitchen that had witnessed every chapter of my life, from the day I first walked in with Daniel as newlyweds, to the nights I nursed my son's fevers, to the lonely breakfasts after my husband passed. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt the same anymore. I was pouring myself a cup of weak hospital-approved tea when I heard a knock on the door, not the hesitant tap of a neighbor, not the impatient pounding of Jessica, but a firm, respectful knock. the kind a person gives when they believe the one on the other side is worth respecting. That in itself startled me more than any yelling or accusation ever could. When I opened the door, a man in a neat gray suit stood there, holding a leather folder against his chest. His face was warm in a way that felt almost unfamiliar after days of tension and cold glances. He introduced himself with a polite handshake, the kind my husband used to give when he wanted to show someone he meant no harm. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm and genuinely courteous, "I'm the attorney representing the buyers who made an offer on this property. I hope I'm not disturbing you." I almost laughed at his politeness after everything I'd been through. Simple courtesy felt like a gift. "No," I said quietly. "Come in." He stepped inside, looking around with a subtle admiration that no one in my own family had shown in years. He wasn't judging the old wallpaper or the worn floorboards. If anything, he seemed to understand that this house was a living piece of someone's life. He took a seat across from me, placed the leather folder on the table, and opened it with the careful movements of a man who handled fragile truths for a living. "Ma'am," he began gently, "there's a small issue we need to clarify before the sale can proceed." The words made my stomach twist. I had expected more pressure, more guilt-tripping, more insistence that I sign away my life. I braced myself, preparing for the same battle I'd been fighting for days. But what he said next didn't just surprise, MIT changed everything. He slid a stack of papers toward me. "Double quotes these," he said, "are the documents your son and daughter-in-law signed in order to list and sell this property." I stared at the papers, the legal words swimming in front of my eyes. My hands trembled slightly, but I forced myself to breathe. He continued explaining in a steady, reassuring tone. "As you can see," he pointed, "the forms are incomplete, legally incorrect, and most importantly, they're missing the only signature that could possibly authorize a sale." He tapped the line at the bottom of the page, the line with my name printed beneath it, the line where my signature should have been. "Your son believed he could authorize the sale," the attorney said carefully. "But according to county records and the deed, the land is in your name only, sole ownership." I felt something expand softly inside my chestnut joy. Not victory, just the slow, deep relief of a burden lifting off a tired heart. I nodded, calm, quiet, almost expressionless, because I already knew, of course, I knew. The land had been in my name ever since Daniel passed. He insisted on it before he died. He told me, "This is your home, your life. Keep it safe." I never expected that decision to become a shield, yet here it was, protecting me long after he was gone. The attorney folded his hands, his voice softening with understanding. "Ma'am, the sale cannot move forward without your consent. Legally, nothing your son signed is valid. Nothing is final. Nothing can be enforced." For the first time in days, I exhaled without feeling my chest tighten. It wasn't triumph, I felt it, wasn't revenge or satisfaction or anything sharp or triumphant. It was relief, deep, painful relief, because even though my own family had forgotten me, the law had not. Outside, faint voices floated in through the open window. Jessica's voice was rising sharp, panic, frantic. "What do you mean this sale isn't valid?" She screeched somewhere near the driveway. "We already made plans. We arranged everything. Plans, their plans, not always their plans. Never mine. Never once had they asked what I wanted. Never once had they considered what this land meant to me. Never once had they paused long enough to see the woman standing behind the property they were so eager to sell." A few seconds later, Jessica stormed into the kitchen like a thunderstorm, her heels clicking angrily against the floor. Her eyes were wide with disbelief, frustration, and the kind of entitlement that grows when a person has never been told no. "Why didn't you tell us you were still the owner?" she demanded, her voice high and sharp enough to cut glass. I turned to face her slowly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I didn't let the chaos shake the calm I had finally found. "You never asked," I said simply. The words hung in the air, like a quiet bell ringing through an empty church. Mark stepped in behind her, avoiding my eyes the way a child avoids looking at a broken window he knows he caused. His face was flushed with shame, but he didn't say a single word. Not one. His silence was louder than any confession could have been. That silence told me everything. He knew what he had done. He knew it was wrong. He knew he had crossed a line he could never uncross, and he did it anyway. I thought I would scream. I thought I would break. I thought I would finally explode from the pressure of everything they had put me through. But instead, something unexpected washed over me, a quiet, steady, heartbreaking peace. Not the peaceful kind that comes from being healed, but the sad kind that arrives when you finally see the truth clearly. When you stop making excuses for people you love, when you realize they were never who you believed they were. I looked at my son, my boy, the child I raised with hands that once trembled only from holding him too tightly, and in his eyes, I didn't see the man I imagined he grew into. I saw the distance, the choices, the selfishness he allowed to grow between us like weeds choking a field. And for the first time, I accepted it. Not with anger, not with bitterness, not with revenge, but with the quiet heartbreak of a mother who finally understands that love doesn't always come back the way you give it. I sat there, breathing slowly, the reality settling into my bones. They had tried to sell my life. They had tried to erase me. They had tried to push me aside like an unwanted relic in a house they no longer valued. But they failed. Not because I fought, not because I argued, not because I begged. I failed because they never bothered to learn the truth. They sold what they never owned. And in that moment, everything shifted. Not just the situation, but something deep inside me. That I was no longer the weak old woman recovering in a hospital bed. I was no longer the mother begging for understanding. I was no longer the widow holding on to memories alone. I was the owner of this land. I was the keeper of its history. I was the woman they underestimated. And now, they were about to face the truth they tried so hard to ignore. The buyers backed out with the kind of politeness people use when they realize they've stepped unknowingly into a family storm. They shook my hand, expressed their apologies, and left my porch with quiet footsteps as if they didn't want to disturb the broken pieces of a life they had accidentally wandered into. The attorney gathered his papers, gave me a look that carried both sympathy and professional distance, and then drove away. And just like that, the land, my husband's land, my family's history stood untouched. The air felt different, almost lighter, as if the soil itself exhaled after days of being threatened. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, the farm felt peaceful again, still, listening. But peace on the land didn't mean peace in my home. My relationship with my son, it did not recover, not even a little. That wound was deeper than any contract, deeper than any legal mistake. It was the kind of wound that forms when trust is pulled out by the roots. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the barn and cast long shadows across the yard, I asked Mark and Jessica to sit with me at the kitchen table. That table, Lord, the memories held in that wood. It was where I fed my husband soup in the winter when his hands were too tired from the fields to hold the spoon. It was where Mark learned to write his name, gripping the pencil too tight and smudging every letter. It was where birthday cakes were cut, tears were shed, laughter lived. Every important moment of our family's story had touched that table. And now, it would witness one more. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw anger across the room like a weapon. I didn't accuse them of the things they already knew. Instead, I spoke the truth, the heavy, simple truth that had sat in my chest like a stone ever since I discovered their betrayal. This land raised me, I said quietly, my fingers tracing the edge of the table the way a mother touches the cheek of a sleeping child. It raised your father. It raised you. My voice trembled, but I kept going because some truths deserved to be spoken even through shaking lips. And when you decided to sell it without me, you didn't just betray my trust. You betrayed our family's story. You tried to erase the history that fed you. Jessica rolled her eyes like my pain bored her, like my heartbreak was just another inconvenience in her day. Mark wouldn't look at me. His gaze stayed glued to the floor, to the scuff mark his own boot had made earlier. I watched him, that boy I carried for 9 months. That boy whose fever I stayed up all night for. That boy I fed, protected, prayed for. My heart broke again, quietly, but I still spoke softly. You forgot who owned the land, Mark, I said. But worse, you forgot who owned your heart. He didn't respond. Maybe he didn't know how. Maybe guilt had built walls inside him he couldn't climb out of. Maybe he had known for a long time that he was losing his way, but he hadn't known how to come home, not really, not emotionally. Or maybe he had simply become someone I didn't recognize anymore, someone who saw me not as a mother but as an obstacle. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, they packed their bags. There were no hugs to soften the blow, no apologies to mend what had been shattered, no last glance back to say they understood. Just the dull thump of luggage hitting the car trunk, the slam of a door, the sharp hum of the engine starting, and then they were gone. I stood on the porch long after the dust settled on the dirt road, watching the trail their car left behind, as if staring hard enough would bring them back. But it didn't. Silence came instead, a silence so wide and hollow it felt like a second emptiness inside my chest. It hurt, God. It hurt in a way that steals your breath, in a way that makes you fold onto yourself as if grief is something physical, pressing down on your bones. Losing a child to death is one thing. Losing a child to betrayal is another kind of funeral, one you attend alone, with no one bringing flowers. But in that ache, in that terrible quiet, a strange strength curled itself inside me. It came slowly, like dawn, gentle, but certain, because I finally understood something that had taken me my whole life to learn. Some losses protect you, some endings are not punishments, but redirections, and some betrayals, no matter how much they sting, are the very things that open the door for you to reclaim your own life. So I stayed. I stayed on the farm they tried to take. I rebuilt the parts of myself that had cracked under their greed. I cleaned the old barn. I repainted the porch. I planted new flowers by the fence, because beauty deserves a place to live, even after pain. And, step by step, sunrise by sunrise, I learned to love the land again, not for Mark, not for Jessica, not even for the memory of the family we once pretended to be. I loved it for me, for the woman who had survived heartbreak after heartbreak and somehow kept standing. Even now, when I walk through the fields at sunset and the sky turns that soft, golden color my husband always loved, I feel him there. I feel Daniel in the rustle of the crops, in the creak of the old gate, in the way the breeze touches my cheek like a memory that refuses to fade. And I whisper to him, just like I did the day the attorney closed his folder and handed my life back to me. We kept it, Daniel. We kept our land. And the wind, gentle and familiar, carries the reply across every acre, an answer only my heart can hear, full of peace, full of home, full of healing.